What is going on, YouTube? Andrew Miller, Shane Black from Hook'emHeadlines.com, the Hook'em Horn Show. We're coming back at y'all today with an early look at the Big 12 championship game next weekend. On December 2nd, we got number 7 Texas facing number 19 Oklahoma State. Those rankings are as of today's AP poll. And got the next college football playoff rankings released this Tuesday, which will be interesting to see. But Texas clinched a spot in the Big 12 championship game with very dominant 57-7 win over Texas Tech on Black Friday. Absolutely mauled the Red Raiders, sent Brett Yormark and Joey McGuire out of Austin with a massive L. And Oklahoma State, as someone watching the game at halftime when Oklahoma State was down by 18 points and just not really doing much, a game that looked a lot like the UCF Oklahoma State game where Oklahoma State got blown out 45-3 in Orlando a few weeks ago. I did not think that Oklahoma State had much of a chance to come back in that one. I thought it was probably going to be OU in the Big 12 title game, but lo and behold, Ollie Gordon comes back, ends up scoring 5 rushing touchdowns. Oklahoma State beats BYU, 18-point comeback wins in double overtime. Oklahoma State also had a chance just to win outright in regulation, but they had an extra point that was blocked. And then BYU came down and scored a game-tying field goal in the dying seconds. So, a lot of drama around the Big 12 this week, that's for sure. But, we got the matchup that I think a lot of us expected because Oklahoma State, after losing to UCF, all they had to do was win out. With a Texas win, you set up this matchup. I know there's a lot of Texas fans out there that would have preferred a Red River rematch over Texas Oklahoma State. I personally, yes, I'm an Oklahoma State undergrad. So this is always a weird week for me. But I have attended one of each school for some degree between Oklahoma and Louisiana, including Texas, so including UT. So the allegiance is there for me. Just essentially mean that I've seen a lot of football from both teams, obviously this season, covering Texas, but also just seeing what Oklahoma State can do. From the OU perspective, they were the team that would have made it to the Big 12 title game had Oklahoma State not won. I'm of the camp, even again, being an Oklahoma State fan, along with a Texas fan, along with an LSU fan, because, I paid money to those schools, so I want to see them do well. I probably wanted to see a Red River rematch. For one, I think that Texas OU would have been better for Texas if they won that game in their playoff conversation than Texas Oklahoma State. Two, I just think it would have been more fun. I get that Oklahoma State's the easier matchup. You can complete the revenge tour as well before exiting the Big 12. And really get to kind of shove it to the Big 12 if, their last chance at keeping the Big 12 title in conference, you end up blowing them out. So I get the argument from both sides, but which one would you have preferred? Like which team to play?
Yeah, so as I was tuned into that Oklahoma State BYU game as well, I didn't have a strong rooting interest either way. It was something I was just, kind of watching for fun. I think, like you said, there are arguments to both sides. I think I was slightly leaning towards hoping to play Oklahoma State just because that is going to be an easier Big 12 championship game, knock on wood, of course. But, Oklahoma, despite losing to the Pokes a month ago, I think we can both agree that the Sooners are a better, more rounded team. And I understand the, college football playoff argument of you kind of want to avenge your only loss. But for Texas, I think this is about winning the Big 12. And I think you get the easier shot playing against the Pokes. So I was probably slightly leaning towards the Oklahoma State side, but it was going to be one of those things where, it's kind of bad karma to root to play a team because that team ends up then, giving you their best shot. So I wasn't really rooting hard either way, but, I'm happy with the matchup. And like you mentioned, it's a great chance for Texas to finish the revenge tour and, leave the Big 12 as a victor over the 9 schools in their last game. So I think it's a good opportunity for Texas, and I agree with you. I can see it from both sides, but probably slightly prefer the matchup we got, and I'm excited to watch. And I think Texas is going to bring their best foot forward on Saturday.
Agreed. I mean, I don't think Texas obviously I don't think Texas is lacking any sort of motivation here. This is your opportunity to, all your goals are still out in front of you. I think Texas already met some of its goals. You won the Big 12 regular season title, and for whatever that's worth in college football, I know it doesn't mean near as much as college basketball. but you got to 11 wins, double-digit wins in the regular season for the first time since 2009. And you got a shot at the college football playoff and a Big 12 title. You appeared in the Big 12 championship game for the first time since 2018. So this has already been a really big and successful season for Texas. At this point, too, you've probably locked up a New Year's Six bowl game, so you at least have that. And that said, Oklahoma State is, again, I mentioned the revenge tour. This is a team that Texas lost to in Stillwater last season. It was probably Quinn Ewers' worst road game of his Texas career. Oklahoma State got some fortunate bounces, I think, in that game. Whenever you had, what was it, like over 100 penalty yards on Texas compared to 0 flags on Oklahoma State in that game.
Yep.
Yep. We'll see how one-sided the reffing is in this game, but I do have to say, for Kevin Marr's crew, I don't think that game was officiated too bad against Texas Tech. I don't think it really mattered on Friday, but it was nice to see that, didn't seem like Brett Yormark and the Big 12 had it out for Texas as much as they did in the Iowa State game. I know Kevin Marr didn't ref the Iowa State game, but still.
It was definitely a storyline heading into the game, and good on the Horns for, jumping out to such a lead and then finishing off Tech to where it didn't really matter in a call here or there, couldn't swing it. But yeah, all in all, I think it was a pretty solidly ref game. And, just a quick aside, looking back at the season, obviously when you look at it, Texas, I think 13th out of 14 in the conference in regard to penalties called against their opponent. There are definitely some suspect flags here and there. The lack of pass interference calls, the lack of holding calls were obvious. But all in all, I don't think it was as poor as some may have predicted at the beginning of the season. I think that's credit to Texas for playing well in a lot of these games, jumping out to big leads, and it didn't matter as much towards the end. But I think it was, a pretty fair job. There aren't a ton of things that I, as a Texas fan, can complain about. I don't know if you saw it the same way, but it seemed like at the beginning of the season, especially after the Yormark comments, that Texas was really going to be up against it.
Yeah, I mean, given how many close games Texas has played in the Big 12 this season, I am kind of surprised that the reffing, the lack of holding and PI calls hasn't led to bigger swings in games, but that's obviously a great thing. Texas hasn't lost any games because of the reffing, and I really only think in terms of scoreboard, the only game that made a significant difference in that regard is the Iowa State game. I think that, kind of a ticky-tack holding call on Kelvin Banks that negated an Adonai Mitchell touchdown, and then, the block in the back call on Keaton Crawford was not a great one on Xavier Worthy's touchdown return on that punt return. So that was the only one, but aside from that, we'll get to the Big 12 championship game stuff here a little bit later, talking about expectations, early thoughts, matchups, things like that. Also later this week, we'll have more in-depth coverage. So stay tuned on the site, on the YouTube channel, everything like that. Link some coverage we've done already down in the description below, as always, to this video. But I do want to talk about some reactions from this weekend, and just not necessarily with Texas, but around college football, college football playoff picture, just kind of wrap up thoughts on the regular season too. So I'll start with this. For me, I think that Texas deserves to be in the playoff over Oregon at the moment. I don't know. Eye test might favor Oregon over Texas in certain regards, especially since Oregon hasn't had as many costly injuries, I don't think, at least on offense. Bo Nix has been healthy all season. I don't think Bucky Irving has missed any time. Troy Franklin, their top receiver, I think has also been healthy the entire season. And so, I get the argument where Texas lost arguably its season MVP in the first 10 games, Jonathan Brooks, suffered a torn ACL, but that's a really nitpicky thing. And, Texas right now, you got the strength of schedule argument over Oregon. I was looking today in ESPN's strength of schedule rankings. Texas is 10th. They also have, I believe, the toughest strength of schedule of any of the playoff contenders. Like, the teams still have a realistic path to get to the playoff. Oregon's in like the mid 60s in terms of strength of schedule. They
just to jump.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to jump in right quick off that, The strength of schedule of AP top 10 teams. Ohio State is 1 at number 6, and Texas is 2 at number 13, and Oregon is 10 out of 10 at 62.
The bigger conversation was how all these other playoff teams managed to keep escaping defeat. I haven't quite seen something like this in the playoff era where you have so many teams that are just skating by just skating on the thinnest ice. Washington being a great example of that. I think no better example than Washington. Florida State's kind of close to that, where Florida State managed to escape Florida because Florida kept shooting itself in the foot. Billy Napier's squad really has some issues on both sides of the ball. Also, injuries mounting for them. Florida State managed to pull out, I think it was a 9-point win. Washington has, what was that, a last-minute field goal to beat Washington State in the Apple Cup. And even Alabama probably had the closest game. They had a 0.1% chance of winning on Saturday against Auburn, and they had another one of those miraculous fourth down touchdown passes. I believe that was to Isaiah Bond. And so, this is interesting, right? Do you think it's better for Texas that Alabama won that game or lost that game? Like it looking back on it.
Yeah, that was a conversation I was having internally. I think that it'll be really interesting if Alabama beats Georgia and you have Texas, Alabama, and Georgia all at 12-1. I think for Texas fans, you want Georgia to beat Alabama. So in regard to the Auburn game, I'm still back and forth, because there's a chance that the thing is with the committee is they're just going to frame it however they want to frame it. If you have a 12-1 Texas and a 12-1 Alabama, and they want Texas ahead of Alabama, they're going to say head-to-head, Texas beat them by 10 in Tuscaloosa. That's all there is to it. Conversation wrapped. If they put Alabama ahead of Texas, they'll say, oh, Alabama had the best win of the season against Georgia on a neutral field. They're a completely different team in what was Jalen Milroe's second start of the year, and we think right now this is a better football team than Texas.
Texas fans are probably going to be very big Louisville fans on Saturday, so that you get the possibility of Louisville upsetting Florida State. I think in the ACC championship game, I think that's the first domino that needs to fall. And then I would agree with you that Georgia beating Alabama, if those two things happen and Texas beats Oklahoma State, no matter what the score, I think Texas is guaranteed in at that point.
Yeah, I think it's weird. Looking at the ESPN All-State College Football Playoff Predictor and all that, it's kind of a crock of garbage, because I think that there's a path where Texas is 100% in the playoff, and you just laid it out. It would be Oregon. It would be Georgia wins, goes 13-0. Michigan wins, goes 13-0. Washington beats Oregon, is 13-0. Florida State loses to Louisville. And then Texas is going to be that fourth team, because then the conversation would be between a 12-1 Texas and an 11-1 Ohio State, or a 12-1 Florida State who just lost with a backup quarterback. So Texas is 100% in that scenario.
It's an unfortunate scenario for Texas this year, again, where so many teams have been skating by the skin of their teeth. And, so yeah, I guess to wrap it up for us, you need a Florida State loss on Saturday. The Pac-12 champion is 95% in, 95% chance in the playoff. If it's Washington, I think 100% chance. If it's Oregon, I think it's 95%. And then, you want Georgia to beat Alabama so that there's not more chaos introduced. Just to give context on what's happening for certain teams and how they're winning games, especially if they're able to win a lot of close games. It's always the scenario of wins above expected, also called luck rating on team rankings. This stat, it's similar to what you would see with projected standings in the NFL or the NBA. Or even the MLB, where you have wins above expected. Oklahoma State and Washington, if you see there, ironically, are the two teams that have the most wins above expected this season. Oklahoma State, Washington, that makes complete and total sense. Iowa's actually up there too. We were talking about them a moment ago, how they pulled out so many close games this year. Oklahoma State is one of those teams where if you really, flip the script and you say, okay, all these one-score games they played, what if they lost? And then the one-score games that they've lost, if they won. And then I don't even think they're bowl eligible if you do that. So they've had a lot of close results this season. Again, this is an Oklahoma State team that I think is decent when they're on schedule and very bad when they're off schedule. When they can't run the ball with Ollie Gordon, when Alan Bowman's unsettled, when the defense is out there a lot, and facing a balanced offense, they really struggle. You saw that against UCF. You've seen that in stretches against BYU in the bit of the first half against Houston. And then even against South Alabama, they weren't giving the ball to Ollie Gordon. At that point, they were still running a 3-quarterback rotation, but they got manhandled by I don't even know if that's a bowl eligible group of 5 team. And so, you know, I think this is a good kind of transition point here to talk about, you know, the Oklahoma State Texas game, the Big 12 championship game this weekend, or next weekend, technically. So, you know, I guess taking a high level look at the Big 12 championship game. So Texas opened as an 11.5-point favorite in FanDuel Sportsbook. The line has moved quite a bit in Texas's favor since. They are up to a 13.5-point favorite. In FanDuel, I've seen it as much as 14.5 elsewhere. Over-under is around 54.5 points. I guess for Vegas right now, what are they expecting? Like, let's just, you know, meet in the middle here and say 14-point favorite for Texas. So what, 55 points here? You're looking at what, like a 34-20 game about. So, which I think is fair, but at the same time, Oklahoma State is one of these teams where, like, they either lose by, it seems like, 1 score or a lot, or like 4 or 5 or 6 scores. There's not many where you get where it's like a 17 or 14 point game, like a 17 or 14 point differential. So, you know, if the offense is in a decent rhythm, I think if you can possess the ball against Oklahoma State, mainly if you can stop Ollie Gordon. I mean, I know that's obviously the biggest key to this game because you got the best run defense in the Big 12 facing the best running back in the Big 12, arguably the best running back in the nation this year, because I think he still leads the nation in rushing yards and probably rushing touchdowns too. If now that's Blake Corum. But Ollie Gordon is close, especially after his 5 TD game yesterday. So those are 2 of the big keys for me, is being able to keep the offense balanced, because Oklahoma State just doesn't have they just don't have a great defense. In every game this season, they have allowed over 200 rushing yards or over 300 passing yards. So that's one for me. Stopping Ollie Gordon is 2, because then you really knock them off schedule. And I think the third one for me is, you know, for Texas on defense, don't forget about Oklahoma State's other playmakers. Brennan Presley's still a guy that can do some good things at wideout. They like to get him involved in different ways, sometimes out of the backfield running the ball, a lot of jet sweeps, a lot of screens. But he's also a good slot receiver. They motion him around a lot. So they really just like to get the ball in his hands. He's had double-digit touches, I think, in two games in a row, maybe 3, but definitely the last 2. Ollie Gordon, again, obviously they like to get him involved, mainly in the rushing game, but really however they can. So occasionally in some little screen plays and swing routes, things like that. Jaden Bray just came back for Oklahoma State, one of their better wide receivers, I think. And Oklahoma State on defense, I mean, they got decent corners, but the safety play has not been very good. They've had some injuries back there. Linebackers are pretty good. Nick Martin, if he's not leading the Big 12 in tackles, he's up there. Good linebacker for them. Xavier Benson, good too. Colin Oliver, good stopping the run and rushing the passer. He's kind of a hybridized edge rusher, outside linebacker for them. And then defensive line, they still got a pretty good one. But you know, this is a team, they just installed the 3-3-5 defense with the new defensive coordinator this year, and they're still struggling to pick up a lot of the concepts. So, you know, there's easy ways to pick apart this Oklahoma State defense if you can kind of hit some decent shot plays early on. It doesn't even have to be a deep ball, but, you know, like 15-yard pass over the middle, then you start running the ball at them, you know, successfully, and you can really open up the offense. So those are my 3 keys.
Yeah, going back to your original point about kind of the luck rating in the 1-possession games, I looked it up. Oklahoma State 4-1 in 1-possession games, so you know, they'd be 6-6 if you flip the script there. And you know, there has to be something said about, you know, teams finding ways to win. It's a mark of a good football team. But I think the luck rating on team ratings is a good marker of kind of your overall point too, that this team might be playing a little bit better than their record. I mean, start after the first 4 games, which included, you know, that loss to South Alabama and the loss to Iowa State on the road, which ended up looking better as the season progressed. and no one was talking about the Pokes. They weren't a team that anyone thought had a chance of making the Big 12 championship game. And credit to Gundy rallying the troops, finding ways to win. Obviously, started turning to Ollie Gordon, who's become the best running back in the country, and they've won 7 of their last 8 coming into this game. And really, that impressive stretch was coming off the bye. They had a bye week 5, late September. Off the bye, they had an 8-point win over Kansas State, 7-point win over Kansas, went to Morgantown, won by 2 touchdowns, dismantled Cincinnati, and then had that win over Oklahoma. But since then, the 3 weeks since then, they got demolished by UCF. We know that game was in, a tropical thunderstorm, but still 45-3 on the road against UCF. Went to Houston and won by 13, and then had the double overtime win against BYU. So haven't been playing their best football over the past 3 weeks. That best stretch of football really came in like October and early November. So on paper, this Texas team should be able to dominate in multiple facets of the game. You look at the Oklahoma State defense, some playmakers there, but they rank outside the top 100 in both rushing yards allowed and passing yards allowed. So I think Sark should be able to, scheme up a solid game plan that gets everyone involved and focuses on both the pass and the running game. We saw Jaden Blue. I mean, good on Jaden Blue. He was a guy that this offseason, I don't know if he actually ever entered his name in the transfer portal, but if he didn't, he was right on the brink. And the Texas staff was able to reel him back in. And now that he's getting some real carries, we see how explosive he can be. And arguably, I mean, he's almost as fast as Xavier Worthy. I'd love to see him run a 40 next to each other, because Blue is absolutely explosive, and he's someone that I think is going to be a big part of the game plan on Saturday. Just the more touches he gets and more of a rhythm he gets into, he's a big play waiting to happen every time he touches the ball. So I feel comfortable, even with Brooks out. We've seen the combination of Baxter and Blue be a really dynamic 2-headed monster. And yeah, I think Quinn, he gets healthier each and every week. It's one of those things where after the season ends, we're probably going to get some intel on, how healthy was Quinn down the stretch of the regular season. And I think when he first came back against TCU, it was probably like 70%. I think he's getting 5 to 10% healthier each week. Took a couple big shots last week against Tech, but was able to sit out the final 18 minutes. I think that extra day of rest only helps him, only helps this team. And like you mentioned, Ollie Gordon is the bell cow, arguably the best back in college football. But what was interesting to me when I was looking at a lot of these numbers is Oklahoma State is 50th as a team in rush yards per game, averaging 169. Most of those come from Ollie Gordon. They don't have another guy on their team with over 200 rushing yards. So if they just try to force feed Ollie, you think about the running game, and that's something that should open up as the game progresses. And we did see that happen against BYU, and I don't doubt that Ollie Gordon's a guy that can carry it 25 or 30 times. But this isn't something that I think the more Oklahoma State runs the football, the more success they're going to find. Texas has been absolutely dominant against the run all year long. Taj Brooks had his moments in the first half last week, but once Tech had to just kind of turn to throwing the ball, they couldn't find much success, and 28 was really out of the game plan. So yeah, I think there's a multitude of ways that Texas can win this game, which is always a good thing. And it's one of those things where last week we saw against Tech, when you get a block punt, when you get a kick return touchdown, that margin or the ways to win just increase. And I think this is going to be a game, if Oklahoma State wants to stick around, potentially pull the upset, they're going to be the team that makes the plays on special teams, that forces the turnovers, that gets a couple bounces that goes their way, because they do and are, going to be outclassed at most positions.
This is the last thing I wanted to mention, and this is more like generic, but like it also is very applicable to, the game coming up next weekend. I wrote this in my takeaways piece after the Tech game, that Quinn Ewers' inability to look comfortable in the pocket at times, and just inability to go through multiple progressions, it's still something I've noticed. I don't think he played a great game against Tech. I don't think he was bad, but I don't think he was good. He had that underthrow that resulted in interception where I think he could have found Adonai Mitchell. He just kind of sidearmed it weird. And then, you had a couple missed throws to Worthy. And then I thought 2 of the 3 sacks he took, I mentioned this in my post-game video too, that they were he had over 3 seconds in the pocket, and he just kind of ate it. He's having issues feeling pressure in the pocket and just making a quick decision to throw it away. He's taking a lot of sacks. Sometimes warranted because, he's still getting back from the shoulder injury. If the decisions are you take a 2-yard sack without taking any contact or toss the ball up into traffic, yeah, I'll take the sack. But some of these are resulting in like 9 or 10-yard losses where you feel like he could get outside of the pocket and throw it away without taking a hit.
I completely agree, and it's as a fan of the New York Giants, we saw this a lot from Eli Manning, and just kind of self-sack yourself and just go down. And I get it with the injury. The interesting thing is Ewers, it seemed like, had developed immensely as a runner early in the season. I mean, looking at it right now, so in college, if you don't know, sack yards count against the quarterback's rushing total. In the first 5 games of the season, Ewers had more than 10 rushing yards in 4 of those 5 games. In his last 5 games, he's had -14, -7, 0, -25, and -13. So it's a little bit of a catch-22, because when Malik Murphy was in there, we were all talking like, Murphy, just take the sack, throw it away, don't make the terrible interception. But now Ewers is in there, and he does seem to be a little nervous in the pocket, and he seems to be self-sacking himself. Like you mentioned, over 3 seconds of time, and you're still going down. That's a bit of an issue. And I think a lot of it is because he's not willing to run as much as he was when he was fully healthy earlier in the season. Hopefully that changes, as he gets healthier in these games. Hopefully we have more important games, a Big 12 championship and potential college football playoff games, and he continues or starts to use his legs again. But it is definitely something to watch for, because he doesn't seem comfortable all the time. And I think that's a really good point with the sacks coming with over 3 seconds to throw in the pocket.
He also has I figured this would be the case, but among Big 12 starting quarterbacks this season, he actually does have the highest percentage of essentially at-fault sacks, where percentage of dropbacks where he's been pressured are considered his own fault as a sack taken, if that makes sense. I don't know if I described that super well. I've got it up here, 6 sacks on 55 dropbacks this season when he's been pressured. That, again, is at his own fault, not in anyone along the offensive line. Usually what that means is that it is a true passing play, in the sense that, it might not be an RPO or anything like that, but you got at least 3 seconds in the pocket before you get pressured or before it collapses, and then you do end up taking a sack. A lot of times that ends up on the fault of the quarterback, because you should be getting the ball out faster than that. That is enough time to work through a progression or two and get the ball out. On the part of him going through progressions, another year in the system, I think at this point it seems pretty likely, if not a given, that he returns for another season at Texas. And I think he will get better. It's just on the injury front, we saw him kind of turtling a little bit, in a sense, last season after he came back from the shoulder injury against Alabama, or that he suffered against Alabama. You could tell he was definitely a little rattled in the pocket, for sure. That kind of stuck with him for a little while. And I think it's doing the same a little bit this year. So I agree that I don't think he should be taking any unnecessary contact. I said that before he suffered the injury. I think avoiding those hits is still key, but also it's okay to use some of that athleticism, that running ability that he's found, like you mentioned earlier in the season. I would like to see a little bit more from him in terms of him being able to go through his progressions, especially against some of these 3-man rushes.
I would just say, I'll leave listeners with this, if you're still with us, just to stay a little grounded, because you mentioned at the top of the show the line's moving in Texas' favor. We've talked about a lot of ways for Texas to win this game. And these might not be super relatable to Saturday's game, but I think it's important to note, one time Alan Bowman's played Texas is that 2020 game where Texas had the onside kick recovery and ended up winning it at the end. But he threw for over 350 yards and 5 touchdowns in that game. And, Mike Gundy, Oklahoma State lost 12 in a row to Texas from 98 to 2009. But since 2010, they're 9-4 against Texas, including a 6-2 mark in their last 8 meetings. So Gundy has kind of owned the Longhorns of late. And while, a lot of people don't believe in kind of looking at that because they're different teams year in and year out, I do think there's something there. I think Gundy will have his guys ready to go. It's been a phenomenal coaching job what he's done this year and just in general in Stillwater. So just to keep Texas fans a little grounded, thought I'd throw those numbers at you at the end.
I don't got anything else. So anyway, for Shane Black, Andrew Miller, Hook'emHeadlines.com, and the Hook'em Horn Show, that's pretty much it. Hook'em.
Welcome.